Russia's defense ministry on Tuesday released footage it said showed troops waving a Russian flag in the Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk. According to Associated Press on Sunday, Russia's chief of general staff claimed during a meeting with President Vladimir Putin that Russian troops had taken full control of Krasnoarmeysk, the Russian name for the city in the Donetsk region. There were no immediate comments from Ukrainian officials on the video, which could not be independently verified. However, during his visit to France, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said fighting was still ongoing in Pokrovsk on Monday. The city sits along the eastern front line in part of what has been dubbed the fortress belt of Donetsk. The line of heavily fortified cities is crucial to Ukraine's defense of the region, including Kramatorsk, Sloviansk and Druzhkivka. Zelensky also rejected Russia's earlier claim of capturing the city of Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region. The Ukrainian leader said that Kiev's troops cleared out almost all of Russian forces in Kupiansk.
Это центр Красноармейска. Российская армия его зачистила.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron in Paris on Monday for talks, as part of a flurry of diplomatic activity aimed at brokering the terms for a potential ceasefire in the nearly four-year-old conflict in Ukraine. According to Associated Press, Zelensky's visit to Paris followed a meeting between Ukrainian and U.S. officials in Florida on Sunday, which Secretary of State Marco Rubio described as productive. The two sides have worked to make revisions to a proposed U.S.-authored plan that was developed in negotiations between Washington and Moscow but criticized as being too weighted toward Russian demands. Those criticisms were perhaps most vehement from Ukraine's European allies who, while welcoming U.S. peace efforts, pushed back on key tenets of the plan. Ahead of his meeting with Zelensky on Monday, Macron's office said the two leaders would discuss conditions for a fair and lasting peace. Later, Macron's office said he and Zelensky held talks with other European partners including leaders from Britain, Germany, Poland, Italy, Norway, Finland, Denmark and the Netherlands. Also included in the talks were European Union officials Antonio Costa and Ursula von der Leyen and NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte. Macron and Zelensky also had phone calls with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Macron's office said. U.S. President Donald Trump has downplayed his administration's original 28-point peace framework, which would have imposed limits on the size of Ukraine's military, blocked the country from joining NATO and required Ukraine to give up territory, as a concept to be fine-tuned. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov confirmed Monday that Russian President Vladimir Putin would meet with U.S. Presidential Envoy Witkoff on Tuesday afternoon. Witkoff's role in the peace efforts came under scrutiny last week following a report that he coached Putin's foreign affairs advisor on how Russia's leader should pitch to Trump on the Ukraine peace plan. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas on Monday expressed concern that the US-Russia talks might end up with Ukraine having to make yet more concessions, like being pressured to surrender its territory. Peskov on Monday condemned Ukrainian strikes on Russian oil infrastructure over the weekend, including an attack on an oil terminal owned by the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, CPC, and another that targeted 2 tankers in Turkish waters. Ukraine confirmed on Saturday it carried out the attacks. Meanwhile, Russia's Ministry of Defense said Russian forces had destroyed 32 Ukrainian drones overnight. The drones were shot down over 11 Russian regions, as well as the Sea of Azov, the ministry said. A Russian missile strike around midday on Monday killed 4 people and wounded 40 others, 11 critically, in the eastern city of Dnipro, according to the head of regional administration Vladislav Hevanenko. The strike hit the city center, damaging 4 residential high-rises, an educational facility and the storage facility of a humanitarian organization, said Dnipro's mayor, Boris Filatov, adding that search and rescue operations were ongoing. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia had fired 89 strike and decoy drones overnight Sunday before the attack on Dnipro, of which 63 drones were shot down or jammed. Overall in November, Russia fired 100 missiles of various types and 9,588 reconnaissance and strike drones into Ukraine, according to the Air Force's monthly report published Monday.
По инициативе украинской стороны вот такая очередная встреча была намечена и состоялась в Абу-Даби. С нашей стороны на ней присутствует.
This week could be a critical week in the war in Ukraine as US-led efforts to bring the nearly 4-year conflict to an end gather steam. A lot depends on Ukraine, but perhaps more depends on Russia, who the West has failed to influence since the invasion began, despite imposing a myriad of sanctions and providing Ukraine with substantial material support. In the latest round of diplomacy, a Ukrainian delegation flew to Miami over the weekend to meet US officials. After around 4 hours of talks, both sides described them as productive, but they failed to give any details. Now US envoy Steve Witkoff and other officials are due to fly to Moscow, where they're expected to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday. But diplomats face an uphill struggle to try and reconcile Ukraine and Russia's red lines. Both Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin have cautiously welcomed the outlines of the US plan. Still, officials on both sides have indicated a long road ahead because there seem to be major sticking points that appear unresolved, such as Ukraine ceding territory and how to ensure Ukraine's future security.
Suffering, and I'm sure the Ukrainian side, I know they do as well, they want peace. But it's also about securing an end to the war that leaves Ukraine sovereign and independent and with an opportunity at real prosperity.
Président, s'il vous plaît.